Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you're not wilting too much. And I hope you're here for a brilliant session on hides and skins, not just staying out of the sun. But you are very welcome, and you'll know lots of exciting stuff by the end of it if you are just here for the shade. I'm Lesley Mitchell. I'm the Policy Director for the Sustainable Food Trust. And I'm here very much as an MC to ask questions and hopefully, if I can, keep us to time today. But we have a really fantastic panel to talk about the challenges, but also the potential opportunities around creating value from hides and skins from our regenerative farms. I think we all understand the situation at the moment, which is that those skins often have no value, may even end up as waste if they aren't exported into the international leather trade. I think as part of, this is one of two sessions, and I'll just give a call out for the wool session that will be in the soil tent after this, that again is looking at that. How can we create value and how can we revalue the byproducts of meat farming systems, but also how can they have value in and of themselves? So we have a fantastic panel here. And I'll just introduce very briefly, we have Mike Redwood, who is a leather industry consultant with, is it seriously 60 years or so of experience? Wow, plenty of wisdom to take from there. We have John Mettrick, who is the MD of Mettrick's abattoir, and is a small abattoir and lots of experience of the role of abattoirs and processors in UK hides and skins. We have Alice Robinson from British Pasture Leather, and we have James Allen from Cotmarsh Tannery, who's in the process of setting up new enterprises to look at and try and build on the opportunities for UK hides and skins. So welcome to all of you. You know yourselves better than I know you. So if I could just get you for maybe a minute or two just to say who you are, perhaps what your background is or why you're interested in this issue and what matters to you now.
Well, you made the point that I've been around a long time. We worked it out at the beginning of lockdown that one way or another, there hadn't been a year passed in the previous 60 that I hadn't been in a tannery, and most of the time in the tannery. Of course, that included student years and things like that. But the point as far as being here is concerned is in those days when there were lots of tanneries and lots of abattoirs, the first thing I had when I was given any responsibility was a wee book in which the mark on every hide identified the abattoir. So I knew from the stamp on the tail of every hide that came through the factory, and it was quite a big one, exactly whereabouts in the country that hide had come from. What's more, we had hide improvement societies in those days. So we had a wee team in our group that went round all the abattoirs to talk to the farmers because we were trying to get rid of a thing called warble fly, which you've long forgotten, but is a terrible wee beastie that hops in the ankles and comes out in the middle of the back and leaves the hides with big holes right in the middle of the, Alice will remind you, is the very best part of the hide. And after it's healed, you're left with a bundle of ugly scars, which are quite hard to deal with. And what we knew is if we could get rid of those warbles, the animal would be happier, the hides would be better, and everyone would win. And that was how I started in the trade. The better the husbandry, the better the hides. The connection was very great. These last 3 years have been an amazement. For the first time ever, we're hearing tales, we have to market leather now, because they've always refused to do it when I'd suggested it over the last 30 years, because every hide and skin ends up as leather. But for the last 3 to 5 years, all of a sudden, we're discovering even somewhere like Britain, which is supposed to be sophisticated and good at sorting these things, and in the United States, where now 20% are lost, never mind what's going on in Africa and the rest of the world, we're actually throwing hides and skins away. And there's a reason for us to reconnect again and recognize that we're all part of the same long supply chain, and it includes not just food, but all these other materials that like hides and skins that can bring wealth or at least decent incomes to every artisan in the chain.
Thank you so much, Mike. John, could you just give us a picture from someone who's had a long experience in the abattoir environment and processing of hides, and your role and why you're coming to that?
Yeah, I mean, when I started in the job, the hide and skins were a major input into the cost of running an abattoir, and you could basically pay for your overheads, so your staff wages and your electricity and everything else, from what you were receiving from the hides. You would be getting, up to £45 for a beast hide. You'd be getting £6.50 for a lamb skin when Ugg boots were all the rage, and it was good times. So it's very difficult talking to my father, who can't understand how something that was so essential to the running of his abattoir has now become a cost. And to put that into perspective, big producers, and we're talking people like ABP, and that'll be paying up to £1.50 to actually have lamb skins taken away. And the trend at the moment is that a lot of the abattoirs are investing in hide shredding machines so that they can get them into the rendering network. And this is all because we've basically fallen out of love with leather. And that's really the problem that sits behind this. So the market is controlled by very few people. Even the actual collectors, who might be independent businesses, have formed a group, and basically, it's all going off to China. It might be via Turkey or whatever. So there's two routes that these hides that are a natural product, a byproduct of us eating meat, are actually either being shredded to go into animal byproducts, or they're being exported. And basically what's happening at the moment is there's negotiations going on between the collectors and the abattoirs, because they're threatening to get these hide trading machines in, or basically be charged less to take the hides away. So obviously, from a small abattoir point of view, I loved it when we used to get things like Jacob sheep in, and we could get the hide tanned locally and give the farmer the skin back, for a lovely sheepskin rug. But I'm afraid it's all gone, and it needs some incentive to get it back. And that's why I'm delighted to be joined on the stand today by people who are actually trying to revive it. And there's nothing more I would like to do than work with people who want to revive the tanning from the hides and skins that we produce in the Peak District.
So when we got together to prep this session, one of the things I think, Mike, that you said was, I think we've got a project here. And I think that sense of what I've heard so far is we're beginning to see these real systemic challenges, that this system is broken if you want to actually build value currently from hides and skins. But there are potential opportunities. And I'd love to hear, Alice, from you in terms of the work that you're doing, your background, why you're here having this conversation today.
Yeah, of course. So my background was in fashion design and accessory design, and I grew up in Shropshire on the border of North Wales. And when I started designing handbags, I had a real desire to work with leather that I could know where it came from, preferably from the UK, and if possible, where exactly and what type of farm it originated from. So the book on this screen is a piece of work that I did a few years ago, really exploring this on a small project scale, one collection made from a single cow. And that led into the business that I've co-founded with Sarah Grady called British Pasture Leather, where our goal really is to be able to produce leather in Britain made from the hides of cattle coming from farms that are producing many benefits around animal welfare, soil health, biodiversity, and creating a regional food system and culture. And one of the challenges that we instantly faced when we started to collaborate with Pasture for Life was that we needed to identify the abattoirs that these certified farms were using. And so we identified one in Gloucestershire that a collection of Pasture for Life farms were using. And when I called up to introduce ourselves and what we were doing, the response was, currently our hides are going into the bin. That they had just lost a hide collector that was coming to take their hides away, that would have salted them, that may have been exported. Around 70% of the cattle hides in the UK are exported, and a small volume produced in the of leather produced in the UK. And one of the reasons for that was that the hide value had dropped so much that this smaller scale abattoir in a more rural location, it wasn't viable for the hide collector to come to collect those hides, salt them, and then sell them into a global industry. And something that actually came up on our call was that when sort of discussing when something is globalized, it's then commoditized, and then really valuable resources, though produced at smaller scales in more rural locations, then fall to the really dominant system of that globalized supply chain. So our mission with British Pasture Leather is to work really closely with the farming community, and also the processes that are really crucial to those farms to be able to produce food for a local community, to be able to have the carcass back and sell it as a valuable product of that farm, and smaller scale and medium scale abattoirs that provide that service of private kill are typically those abattoirs that are most left out of the global commodity system for hides and skins. And so what we are working on is being able to identify those processes, ensure that when the hides are removed, they are labeled and the value of that farm origin is retained on the hide, and it can go into our supply to produce vegetable tanned leather in Britain. And so designers and brands like my former self, who really wanted the desire to have a connection to the farming system that leather was began on, but also in order to be able to retain the value for a farming community and also for the food system it originates in.
Thanks so much. And James, you've kind of bet your career, your future career, on going into this space. Why on earth would you do that if you're hearing all these challenges? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so very good question. And we'll see if we can answer it by the end of the session. So my wife and I are farmers. We started off conservation grazing through the Cotswolds for 10 years, so we didn't own a farm. 18 months ago, we were in a fortunate position where we could buy a farm, and that opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for us. So Katie works with the wool from the sheep. She produces a really high-end kind of knitwear collection and is very focused on the kind of end-to-end process of that fibre. So from the sheep all the way through to a finished product. Having the farms allowed us to have a base, makes the farming, managing the livestock easier, but as I say, it gives us the potential to think, well, what can we do next? So I went away for 3 weeks in March to go and see a tannery in the US. I came back to find, I think about 800 dye plants had been planted in the garden, as my wife had, while I was away, built a dye garden, so a natural plant dye garden. We're going to follow that with a dye kitchen, so offer the facilities for people who want to naturally dye small-scale batches of wool to come onto the farm, to learn how to do it, and then to use those facilities. We are a farm that believes in nature, so nature is one of the kind of key stakeholders in our business. As you can see from the slides, we are Pasture for Life certified. We are almost through to our Soil Association organic certification. And that follows through on the wool collection side of things, where Katie is really focused on that natural fibre. Where we're going from there is the tannery. So I went out and bought a drum, and then I couldn't go backwards. I want to tell that story from field to fibre for the leather. It's a difficult story to tell, as these guys will tell you about, but I wanted to be able to produce leather we could show to people coming onto the farm how we take it through the full process. So one of the objectives of the farm and the tannery as well is to actually have it as an education setup. So we will have students from schools, colleges, from the fashion industry coming to the farm, seeing the livestock come from field all the way through to the finished product, see the dye garden, see the dye kitchen, and see the tannery itself. And we will help kind of that next generation really understand where those natural fibres come from and how they can be grown or produced with kind of nature in mind. We'll also produce, high quality leather, hopefully. That's the objective. Obviously, it's kind of a pointless tannery without that. And we're aiming at the tan and return to the farmers market. So farmers have either the leather back, which they can do something with, and the likes of Andy Rumming, who's probably in the audience, got a farm sneaker workshop as an example, where he's turning his leather into farm sneakers and actually getting people onto his farm to actually see the farm and then actually make sneakers out of the leather he has had produced. We'll also offer the tannery up to allow other tanners or would-be tanners to come to the tannery and use some of the equipment. Some of the equipment is expensive. It's a real barrier to entry, particularly for cattle leather. So, the fleshing machine, for example, second-hand reconditioned one, it's going to cost about £45,000. I'm going to use it one day a month. It's not financially viable for me to do that unless we can actually get other people to come in and use that machine as well. And that lowers the bar to entry for other people coming into the industry at that kind of micro tannery scale. So that's the plan that we've got. We are part of the way through that process at the moment. We've kind of been through the architects, we've done designs, I'm working with a mentor on the leather side of things. And I've been very fortunate enough to be given a Churchill Fellowship Travel Scholarship. As I said, I spent 3 weeks out in Oregon working as an intern for a tanner there, and hopefully I'll be going to the tanneries in Italy and Germany later in the year. We also are kind of following that journey, and I'm hoping next year that we'll be kind of breaking ground and building the tannery. I won't go into too much more on the tannery. There's a talk on the fibre shed stand tomorrow at 9:30 for anyone that wants to hear a bit more detail about that. But that hopefully gives you a bit of an overview.
Thanks so much. And I guess I'm hearing a number of things here. I think one is that issue of globalization and commodification of leather, and that this is about taking that back, and that there being some core elements of transparency, traceability, provenance that sit behind that, but also a story that needs to be told about the difference that of the product. It's not the same thing that we're talking about here. I guess I find it quite shocking. I spend my life working on food and farming and so on. And the idea of that level of waste is quite profound and disturbing. And I think there is another piece that, for me, this echoes the wool conversation we'll have later, but whereby our fibre systems and our clothing systems have become, for example, very much focused on really fossil fuel intensive as well as very wasteful products. I think I was shocked at the scale of plastics involved. And if you start to use the word plastics rather than nylon for clothing garments, for example, it kind of makes you go, oh, okay, that's a whole different thing that we're trying to get rid of. We're worried about plastic in the sea. We're not worried about plastic that we're wrapping around ourselves or making our bags out of. So it feels like this is a step change here, and it is a reconnection, and it is that mindset shift, but it's also something very practical that needs to happen because this system has geared up to large-scale commodification and replacement of cheaper materials and so on. So, Mike, I just wanted to come back to you first of all to ask you the question of what do you see needs to shift in the system? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to have that's different to make this work?
I think we have to completely redefine globalization, and we have to completely redefine efficiencies. They're the two wicked words that we've let in. The leather industry has always been globalized. If you look back thousands of years, hides and skins were always traded. we like to get Russian leather down from the Baltic 1,000 years ago. It was tanned entirely different. It had a pattern on it from wood that they used to lay on it, and it was great for furniture and bookbinding because they used birch bark oil on the top, and insects didn't like to eat it. We love to get sheepskins and goatskins from North Africa, the Moroccan leather, and that came up. Globalization was about moving the best to where it was wanted and getting its highest value. But since we began in business, not just agriculture, not just leather, but all sorts of businesses, probably less in tanning than in most others in 1960, towards big companies, towards this situation you see where 3 or 4 companies have 80% of the market and drive everything. They're the ones that really push this globalization concept of chasing cheap labor, chasing cheap manufacturing. They took our shoe industry overseas, they took our clothing industry overseas, and they didn't mind what was left behind. And you have this other word called efficiencies, which seems to completely ignore nature, completely ignore humanity, and only take interest in making high levels of profit at the bottom line. And even coming up to the arguments about the selection in GDP, too much of the definition of we can do things more efficiently seems to ignore these things. And so globalization turned into lowest common denominator and commoditization. So just as you were saying, the hides disappear off to China, get made into factories with lines that are longer than you can see if you stand above them looking down into shoes. It's all automated. People come last. And when the price of hides goes up, they just introduce plastic. And then they realize they can stamp plastic in lots of cheap layers. And if they go back to leather, they've got to train more people to handle it. It's difficult, it's costly. And that's where we've lost huge market share in the leather industry because sometime in about 2016, 2015, when the raw material prices were high, they swapped. And unusually, normally straight after a high price, the leather regains its market share. It hasn't done this time. And people don't want expensive raw material. The clothing markets, the real big retailers changed to plastic too. And it's hard to make a really good clothing leather in high volume in the world. And suddenly we're seeing it dropping down on our doors. So we have to do more of this onshoring, bring back this localization of, when I began, we used all our hides here. We were told the UK leather trade would shrink to the size of the kill. And now we're exporting 70, 80% of the kill. It's got to change. It's terribly environmentally inefficient to be sending hides elsewhere. We totally lose our understanding of value. There's long been a need, a real need. There's lots and lots of young craftsmen in this country, and old ones too, who want to handle leather. And the only people who are enjoying it are a very nice group of merchants who import leather from America, from China, from Bangladesh and other places, while our hides go increasingly into the bin. So there's a real opportunity here, and it's a delight to hear that people are beginning to address it.
It feels like a big task, but it also feels like a huge opportunity. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that it is about localization. It is about understanding the value of what we already have here, what we're already producing from regenerative farms and elsewhere, and being able to use that. But there's also issues of infrastructure and skill and so on that are core to that. So from your point of view, John, what's disappeared and what do we need to build back to make these systems work?
Well, it's interesting to see what James said at £45,000 for, a piece of kit, to get the tanning thing going, when firms are considering spending £110,000 on hide shredding machines, and that sticks in my craw even more. So part of my role as chair of the abattoir sector group is to talk to government, and we talk to them particularly about animal byproducts in general, and hide and skins is one of the things that we're talking to them about. So I think if you say what needs to happen next is we need some help to actually get a tanning industry off the ground. It might start small, and it might start with small abattoirs working with small tanners, but I think we need to start somewhere, and that way everybody can benefit, because the small abattoirs will have the traceability, they'll be using the local animals, you'll be able to have rare breed leather, you'll be able to have pasture-fed leather, the customer will have a choice in what they can buy. The slaughterman takes an immense amount of care when they're hand flaying a hide. They can even ambidextrous, so they can use either hand to actually take the hide off. And the skill is and that's within a 2 millimeter tolerance before he cuts through the hide. So they take tremendous, care, because they respect the animal that's there for our food, but they're also trying to make the byproducts that come from that animal usable. And to see somebody who's got that kind of skill being told to shred, to put in a bin, to take away, to stain, is criminal. And I think that's where we need to start. So one of the things I'll be pushing within the abattoir sector group is for some funding, towards, micro tanneries to get, let's start somewhere. But I think for everybody here, really get that message out, really, that leather is a natural product that's going to waste. And when we're also concerned about the environment, how can this be happening? It's astonishing, really. And that's my message, really, is that I will work with the abattoir sector group, talking to DEFRA, trying to get funding towards, establishing small tanneries, and then hopefully we can start somewhere and build up what we've lost.
Thanks. And thanks, John. And I guess one of the things that I'm hearing here as well is, what do people want to buy? And this whole conversation, and where do animals fit, particularly ruminants? Where do they fit in this conversation around what is environmentally good moving forward? What is regenerative? And I just wanted to flag a couple of things. One is the Sustainable Food Trust has been very supportive and is part of the abattoir sector group. And I would suggest that any of you who are interested in this, it is a very live moment in time for funding for small abattoirs, and for innovation and people setting up new abattoirs. There is money out there, and also for buying new equipment. So please do approach my colleagues, including Megan Perry, around that, or John, if John hasn't had to disappear out quickly after this. I think the second thing is that in terms of looking at the environmental impact of animals, we have this very dichotomized conversation about, do we have animals or not? Let's get rid of all our livestock. Let's particularly get rid of all of our ruminants. And I think we're seeing a shift both in the scientific knowledge and the mindset behind the role of grazing animals and ruminants, that actually they're a much bigger part of the solution rather than the demons that they've been made out to be. And so I do think that there is a shift both in mindset, but also the narrative of the place and the role and the value of leather, that actually leather is a good thing, not something that is something we should be moving away from. I'd love to hear from you, Alice, in terms of British pasture leather and the work that you do. Can you explain what you feel like, well, also what you're contributing, but also what you feel like you need to make that a success?
Yeah, absolutely. So just on your point there of a mindset shift, something that has been really exciting along this journey and with our close collaboration with the Pasture for Life community is being able to take brands and designers and users of leather, not necessarily our leather at the moment, but using leather writ large, is into the farms and onto the fields of the partner farms that we're working with, and being able to see those benefits in a very visceral and tangible way. We have Nikki Yoxall and Claire Whittle like digging through cowpats and digging up a lump of soil and being able to see root structures and depths of roots and diverse swards, and being able to connect the material to that farming system, and then being able to show them the material that originates from them, whether that what that looks like, what that different character is. And that has been really, really exciting. And it's also been quite shocking in how far that separation has become. In terms of infrastructure that we're really in need of is that, as mentioned throughout this discussion, is the sort of integration and centralization of our food system in terms of scales of abattoirs and the value of the hides that are going into the globalized system. Is that really wanting to follow the farms that we're working with at PFL, so the abattoirs that they're using are typically smaller and medium-sized abattoirs, and often the really crucial piece between an abattoir and leather production is the hide collection system. So the hide merchants that go at the end of a kill day and take the hides away to salt and store them, and then sell them into an industry. And it's that piece of infrastructure that we're really keen to be able to support, or being able to be a source for taking those hides. And I think that has a lot to do with the hide collection merchant industry, which is kind of like underground. It's also a little bit like the mafia, but it's really fascinating, and actually people who are really engaged in this problem and have seen the change in the infrastructure and have seen the challenges themselves. And something that has been quite startling for us is that because the smaller and medium scale abattoirs that I mentioned, who have had to discard of hides in the past, are really willing to take that extra step and care and want to of the removal of the hide, labeling it, and for it to be collected at the end of the day. And we can then give a steady and consistent price for that hide, not fluctuate based on the global commodity system, even though it's a really key revenue stream for an abattoir. Whereas when we have spoken to larger scale abattoirs, that if a farmer's been using that abattoir, and that because they are working so efficiently, to be able to say, please, could we have these hides back 6-7 times the price? So the unfairness of that is really quite startling, and I think that's very illustrative of how streamlined it has been to be able to generate some revenue for all these hides, and that there needs to be a totally different system consideration and new infrastructure to support it, and not try to compete with something that is a much bigger giant. And that's really where we're wanting to be instigators of that change, and also be able to then produce the material that is accessible for people to use.
I just find it absolutely fascinating, the issue of the inequality of cost versus the value of the final product that somebody is going to produce. And my guilty secret is I've got a bit of a bag thing, and I own an MS bag, and I paid £4,000 for that, and it's my nest egg. Don't come and rob it from my house. But so I might be a bit extreme, but I've only got one, and a Chanel. But the point is, I'm quite legendary in the sustainability movement for my unsustainable bags. But I think it's really interesting that we're talking about shredding a really valuable product at the same time that there is so much value, potential, opportunity in the system, and so much opportunity in terms of being able to rethink and re-see the value of what an artisan might produce from that. Can I just bounce back a little bit? Sorry, and I wanted to say, James, back to that kind of carbon and the link to the environment and the link to the soil and the link to our future resilience and environment. James at lunchtime, sorry, I'm doing anecdotes now. James at lunchtime presented me with a dung beetle that then quite rapidly flew off. They do dung beetle safaris here. It's amazing, but it was literally the living, breathing connection between that animal that produces the leather and the carbon sequestration that was going to happen because of that beetle doing its work to get that cowpat back into the ground and to get carbon back into the soil. And so I think it's just really profound while you're here to have the opportunity to see and engage with people who are doing this incredible work. It's a tough ride because the system is broken for you now, but you're going in the direction of the future needs. And to that point, James, for you, what do you think you need in terms of the revival of the leather and particularly the tanning sector to actually make this stuff happen?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, for me, there's two things. First one is knowledge. So I've spent the last 12 months immersing myself in understanding leather and how to produce leather. I haven't even scratched the surface. We have a lot of knowledge in the industry in this country, particularly in veg tanning, which is beginning to go. We are losing tanneries 1-2 a year, and there are, for cattle hides, there are 2 tanneries left that will do veg tanning at commercial scale. There's a lot of knowledge that is moving out of that industry, or moving out of those tanneries, which needs to be tapped into, like Mike, like a mentor I'm trying to work with. So trying to get support from the industry who are begging to help. So that, it's an open door. They're pushing in to get the people in to work with people like myself, other people that are interested in setting up tanneries, to be able to give them the knowledge, the understanding of how to do it before it's lost, because it will get lost. And the second one comes down to money. To set up a tannery to do cattle hides, it's a large capital investment. And as I mentioned the fleshing machine earlier, which I will use once a month. It's not a great return on that. And as I say, what we're trying to do is be a hub, and have that so that knowledge and machinery can be shared to allow people who want to set up micro tanneries for cattle hides to be able to get across that barrier. And if I can get funding and support, so the tannery is likely to be a community interest company, a non-for-profit, to actually enable us to try and do this. So if I can get support to get those things in, then I not only have a facility that people can use, but I have a facility that experts can come and show how the kit's used. There's another machine that's used further on down the process, which is a splitting machine. I have been told, and I completely believe him, by an experienced tannery manager at the Institute of Leather Technology, that I will never be able to use the machine. I will put 100 hides through and it will spit out bits at the other end, because it's a very skilled machine. And I won't run it often enough with enough hides to get good at it. But there are people in this country that can. So is there an opportunity there for a splitter to be on our farm, on our tannery, and for that expert to come and split for me, for other people in that process? Because at the moment it's a real sticking point, because I can do so much of the process, but I need to at some point split a 4 or 5 mil hide into 2.5 mil, 3 mil, or whatever. And there's no way at the moment I know that we'll do that, and particularly in the part of the process that I'd like to do it, which makes the tanning easier down the line. So in an ideal world, from my perspective, we're a hub. We get financial support to have the expensive bits of kit to allow people to use them, to allow people to come in and in their kind of, as they're moving out of the industry and not necessarily working full time, to be able to come in maybe once, twice a month, run the machine for any number of tanners that are wanting to come in and have that machine used. And the more people we can have as micro tanners, the more product goes out, the more need there is for it, the more this supply chain works. So the more people that John is going to end up ultimately supplying with leather, with skins from the abattoir. And that goes further. So it goes down to the farmer as well. The farmers at the moment, it's a forgotten part of the animal. They've spent a long time caring for that animal, 2-3 years, depending how old the cow is. and that hide just, as far as they're concerned, disappears. So to value it that way. And it goes beyond that as well. So, if we're bark tanning, so the idea is eventually we will be bark tanning, there's a whole coppicing industry, which at the moment doesn't have a market for the bark. So if we can build this supply chain, build the value chain, and get the support in the right places, then actually there is a final end product, which means there is value trickled all the way back through to the abattoir, through to the farmer, and through, potentially to the coppicer managing and producing bark.
So it sounds like there's a whole web of potential around this.
Yeah, it opens up. It's an enabler.
Yeah, and I'm going to chuck a question at probably both Mike and particularly Mike and John, but any of you jump in that we haven't prepared for. So, but it just comes up in the conversation. We have, Mike, you've got 60 years of experience. John, you have a whole experience of 100 years of a family business behind you. How do we make sure we don't lose the knowledge and skills that we still have in the industry? So your splitters, for example, what do we need to do to retain that knowledge? Are there places where people can go to, where people come together? What do we need to do?
I think there'd be a good rationale for moving quickly, because we do have a lot of older guys who've got recent experience who could do it. But the machines are big and they're not desperately complicated. There's plenty of them around the world. Wouldn't panic me about getting one. And I've had to set them up from scratch in obscure, rare parts of the world through my career and take them out of boxes and say, let's get this thing going. I don't see a huge problem in that. I'm more worried about what John's saying about, spending what for even a small tannery is huge amounts of money, buying a shredder and going down a one-way street from which it seems it might be quite hard to return. The idea of losing the hides altogether seems pretty dreadful. There's also, you're talking about, you think society's changing towards liking leather. I hope you're right, but at the moment, all the science that is being bandied around still charges hides and cattle with all sorts of environmental values that are badly calculated, and it doesn't charge polyester, nylon, PVC, any of the petrofibers with anything whatsoever for their petroleum origins, their fossil fuel. There is no charge put on them, and there is no charge put on them from the fact, for example, that the majority of microplastic in the ocean appears to be coming from us washing polyester clothing and the pieces disappearing into the drains and being too small to be picked up until they reach our oceans and disappear off into these sinks in the Pacific. We've got to change that because the thing that also comes with it, and we still have in this country, is an objection to building things like tanneries other than on really micro scale. And we try and build a big one. We have to be very careful we don't get pushed into costs in many millions of pounds of building huge effluent plants. A little bit about similar to what I was hearing you saying, about regulation, determined to drive out the middle-sized and smaller abattoirs. And we are still seeing it in regulations in the world, that the regulations that are appropriate to a big tannery start to get applied to middle-sized ones. So you start to move from the really micro, that James is talking about, to something that will do a few hundred hides a week, and you start to see a whole scale of cost coming in. And I think also we have to be careful with our processing, in as much as the processing that goes with high volume international leather is definitely not appropriate to be reintroduced in these new tanneries we built here. We need to take some of the older stuff, like James is doing, and make it fit better for a modern world. Whether that can fully take us back to coppicing, because coppicing in this country means oak bark, and oak is one of the slowest vegetable tanning, although it's traditional here. It's so slow, that's why we have, if you do it in pits, the laws that the leather has to lie in pits for a year before then processed. I don't think we can do that. We need to be tanning in drums now, generally speaking, and doing it in a day or two if we're going to make the types of leathers that our artisans really want. But it's fully viable. I'm sure we can do it at having the Billy Tannery, which has shown it already in the UK for the last, I think, a decade. It's been working and it's growing more. And having what you're doing here now, I think we're getting the kernel started that we can build momentum and see it grow. And from what I can see, there's a lot of goodwill. And the machines, yes, they're expensive, but if you're knocking around with £100,000 for a shredder, there's a lot of good quality tanning machinery to make a simple tannery doing quite decent volumes. Thank you very much. We can get going.
There's a real project here. Mm-hmm. John, is there any other? Do you have any other thoughts briefly about skills?
No, I think it's been covered very well by Mike. I mean, my end of it, I can barely remember, to mean the, Markindales, to mean the tanning places that we used to supply, because this deterioration is not recent. It's happened, over a long period of time, but it's just got more acute. And I think it's just becoming more visible because the price has been dropping for a long time. Now it's gone into negativity. Now it's gone into people looking at other ways of getting rid of hides, which is the shredding aspect. So all I can say is that obviously there's an educational piece in trying to capture the knowledge that's still around in the industry than the tanners that are left. There's an environmental piece to make sure that we're actually doing tanning, so we're not going back to systems that are going to damage the environment. And there's a piece like to work on having small abattoirs, possibly even investing in a tannery, that's on site, so they not only can produce things like pet food and that from their animal byproducts, but they can also, produce, their own leather. Perhaps that's a route to go down. Obviously have to be a separate facility, but there has to be some kind of government backing, I think, because, like you said, the number of tanneries that are left, makes the number of small abattoirs look great. It's an even worse situation. So it's going to require a lot of investment and a lot of will from the government and that to push this and to support those people like my colleagues on the panel here who want to get it going again.
Yeah, and I think just a nod back to the abattoir sector group as one particular means by which there's direct engagement with DEFRA, but the government needs to hear what is needed for us to be able to move forward. We have got about 6 minutes. You have to stick your hand up high if you want, because I've got bright lights shining in my face. Don't ask me about my bags, ask them about the opportunities we have going forward. Have we got a... Yeah, great. This gentleman with the glasses over here was the first hand I saw up. And if you keep it brief, we can fit in 2 or 3 questions. Thanks.
No worries. Question for James, I think, really. I'm going to be involved in a deer management project, Cotswold-based one, relatively shortly. And we're building supply chains for places for the meat to go, which isn't an issue. We're going to have quite a few hides about. I'm just wondering whether venison hides or deer hides could be almost like an educational practice tool.
Yeah, so Jack Milligan, who is here somewhere or other with his hand up. So Jack has a tannery that he's 12 years, I think. You've been working that, started with goat and is now doing deer hides, and just go and see the products that he has had made from that deer hide. They are stunning, high quality. So yeah, it's absolutely happening already on that. What is harder is for doing cattle, just because the size of equipment just steps up significantly. But yeah, go talk to Jack.
Jack, can you just put your hand up so that people know to jump on you afterwards? There you go. Cool. Another question? This gentleman over here? It's when you catch my eye that you...
Where would your Hermes handbag have come from, in fact?
I think it would have been Italian tanned hide, and I don't think it's in any way regenerative at all. I did once have one of the Gucci Jackie ones that was the Eco Green label one, which was full traceability, but that was fascinating because it was so hard for them to deliver that product, and it was one of the first prototypes. It's moved on a long way since then.
But they are a very supportive company. They love leather. They back leather as a material. They source it carefully. And if you buy from their new, forget the name, but they've got a nice new collection made of development of the Russian leather, which I mentioned. And it's all tanned and processed from British hides and in Devon. With nobody in the UK makes volume big enough for the Hermes production, and that's really why they're in France, because that's where so many of the small animals are, and it's in a way why France has a bigger tanning industry than we do, because they've kept the sector together, so they can measure their sector from. I can only go from the tanneries. I don't know about the abattoirs, but. They've got 1,500 employees in tanneries, and they've got about 200,000 employees in the sector, and they're exporting billions and billions of dollars and taking big market share from the Chinese. They're really good evidence of how they've succeeded, and we've rather failed by not understanding how the sector works. And if you're going to follow that through, one more thing, if you let me just say it, is down by Meal, where they make gloves from the sheepskin, from the Roquefort cheese, which has been going back since ancient Roman times. They've just applied for the new regional artisan recognition for the keeping of sheep, in that way, the making of cheese, the tanning of leather, and the making of gloves. It's a wonderful story.
That's great. We've got 3 minutes to fit in. I think, Alice, did you want to say something here? And then there is a gentleman over there. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that, just when we think about like an Hermes handbag and how that, how we're looking at the perception of quality within that handbag. Obviously, the craftsmanship is unbelievable. But I think it's something that is more, something that adds to the challenge around education, around what the material is, because the majority of leather that most people we would all interact with has been quite highly manipulated from what it looks like in its natural state. So in our stand with Pasture for Life, you can see some full grain leather that has evidence of scars and bite marks and growth lines. So all that's happened to that leather is the hair has been removed, and it has been tanned, and it's been tumbled to make it soft and supple, and it's been dyed. And that is a really clear illustration of what a hide looks like from a pasture-based system and what the resulting quality is. And in the leather industry, there is something called grading. So you take out the hides that have the clearest grain quality, because the highest spec of leather for your Hermes bag is you want full grain. So no sandpaper is buffed off the surface, and heavy pigment hasn't been applied. And so there is this mismatch of the volume of that highest sort of perfection level of leather in its natural state versus the quality and look of hides that are coming from different types of farming systems. Or if they, so for instance, we've had some hides come through British pasture leather where the cattle have lived outdoors and bale grazed, or used shelter in woodlands, and that has a total different evidence and proof of life within that leather than hides that have come through other farming systems and that have been separated and graded through very, very strict processes before they are turned into a leather good.
And I think that's a really key thing here, is this is about rethinking what is quality as well, and it's certainly making me rethink what is quality.
No, but Hermes is
and I just
quality.
like to jump in.
But I'll still keep my nest egg.
Yeah, just let me jump in there, because that is a 20th century concept, and particularly a late 20th century concept. There was no such thing as this downgrading as we see it now before the Second World War. we handled hides differently, and we didn't have these things that you would call blemishes and stuff. This is modern man destroying our own materials.
We've literally got like 1.5 minutes, something like that. So can we just go to this gentleman here? And if you haven't had a chance to ask a question, please, hopefully my colleagues will be around for a little bit afterwards. If not, all of their biographies and I think contacts are in the delegate speaker list as well.
A quick question then for Mike and John. Is the demand at the end of the line, is there manufacturers out there, especially in this country, who are willing to pay a decent price for the hides?
I think that's really Alice, isn't it? Because Alice obviously deals with the fashion people, so...
Hello? But Alice is, as I see it, is probably the top end of the market, and I'm thinking about the quantity rather than the quality end.
I think for us, you know, to actually slaughter animals and actually all the processes that are involved and all the regulations that are involved, our involvement has really ended when the actual hide leaves us. At the moment, you know, that's so we don't really know, you know, I don't know, you know, to mean whether there's a demand there for it. All I know is what I'm seeing is that the market as it stands at the moment is run by some very big players who are dealing with a very small number of people, and basically the market goes the way they want it to go, and there's no alternatives for us. Obviously, with the move towards people wanting to eat more locally and traceable and all those messages, why that message can't go through to leather as well, you know, then I would think people would be prepared to pay more. I certainly know that, for instance, like, you know, rugs and stuff we're still getting asked for, even though we might not have done them for 30 years. Customers would still say, "Are you doing them sheepskin rugs your granddad used to do? Can you get me one of them Jacob sheep or Hebridean or whatever?" You know, because I know you deal with some of them farmers, and we just can't. So that's the only demand I'm aware of, is that it's still living in people's mindset that they used to be able to buy that from us.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, there is definitely a demand. So how Sarah and I are working with British Pasture Leather is we identify where those abattoirs are and then ask, can we purchase that hide? Can you keep it separate for us? Can you ensure that it has been labelled with the ear tag number of the animal? We receive invoices of each farm and each hide that enters our system. And what we're trying to do is just have a system that is separate from the existing industry. And I would say that on the design and brand side, there is a huge demand for that type of material, especially from food systems that are really representing, as you said, native breeds, being able to have horned cattle, the types of local food systems that those farmers are being able to create. And that is what is sort of how crucial the small and medium-sized abattoirs are. And I think being able to translate that message into the final material is really crucial. The bottleneck that we have around scale, and therefore what is impacting price and availability, is on the infrastructure side. So there is many more hides that we could be collecting, that we could be turning into leather. The tannery that we're working with, which is in Bristol, which is one of the 2 remaining vegetable tanneries that are in the UK, they had never contracted with an outside business until Sarah and I sort of called them up at an opportune moment during lockdown and said, you know, are you up for trying something a bit different? We'll fit into how you need to work. So the volumes that you need will create a different type of way of dealing with our hides and go from there. And that has grown slowly, but we are really capped at what we can do within Britain at the moment without being able to have additional support to really improve that infrastructure. And from a brand and designer level, we're just about to launch our leather to be able to be purchased at small volumes for makers and designers. And I think brands in the broader sense of the design industry are under huge pressure to be able to have traceability on their leather, be able to really describe the impacts of the farming systems that it's connected to. And as we've discussed, it's an incredibly complex web. So it's a really opportune moment to connect those dots. It's been really fascinating for us to be able to move from literally the farm level, through the abattoir, hide collector, tannery, to the brand side, into the design studio, and connect all of those dots, and then bring those brands along that process. And I think that sort of joined up approach, connectivity, and sort of getting all those people around the table for the first time, not for the first time, for the first time since a while, will sort of help lead that along.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to cut you off there. We are over time, and our lovely sound man looked like he was about to switch our mics off. So, yeah, thank you so much for your attention. This is just the start of the conversation.